Ms. Richards, I wondered if we could go back to just where we were before the break.
I was going to ask you to do that in any event, so perfect. JEVA 5026, I think, Seamus. I'm not sure whether we've all got UI and electronically we have the documents in exactly the same format.
So, this is the exact first one I wanted to look at. I've got the page numbers, I think, in the same format you have. So what I wanted to highlight firstly about this is the use of the language, which I think shows the predisposition of the civil servants regarding transparency. Specifically that sentence, to put this in context, this whole email chain is about finding ways not to release information. This sentence, I don't think we can apply Section 22, unfortunately. It's unfortunate that they might have to give me this information. And then also the sentence above that where they say there is no intention for the files to be transferred to the National Archive. I'm told were it not for the review, they would be destroyed. The review being this inquiry. The reason that was said was that it was suggested, if we go to page 3 of this document, you can see the last sentence there. I wondered whether we could use future publication and open up as part of the next release at the end of the year. There's an exemption under FOI where a public body doesn't have to release information if it's due to be published at some point in the future. So within this email chain, it was suggested that basically by transferring it to the National Archive, they then wouldn't have to disclose it at that moment through FOI. And also, I wanted to highlight what's on page 7 of this document, email chain. The second sentence, the request was for the first 20 pages of a particular file relating to the issue of haemophiliacs. The information is attached. The information dated back to 1990, and so many of the FOI exemptions are not available to us. That's because for information, it's now 20 years. It used to be 30 years old. A lot of the possible exemptions they can use fall away by, I think it's Section 64, which doesn't allow them to use some of the other exemptions. But I think what's important here is you're seeing the approach that rather than looking at the information I'm asking for and then saying, oh, there's an exemption here, we can't release it, they've decided they don't want this information to be released and are now trying to find any possible exemption to not release it. And if we go back, please, to page 3 again. The second full sentence, and I would use Section 31 for now, can always revisit if it goes to the Information Commissioner's Office. So they then plan to use an exemption that they don't even think, by the looks of this, will stick or is legitimate, and kind of half expecting me to go to the ICO anyway. So I just want to drive home that point again, and this is not specific to the Cabinet Office. I've seen this with the Department of Health as well. They decide they don't want to release the information, and then we'll try and find any possible thing that might possibly stick, rather than erring on the side of transparency.
And there were 2 further pages I wanted to just draw your attention to, which I think probably pick up on the theme you've just identified of not wanting to and therefore trying to find reasons not to disclose. And we might get a clue as to why that was the thinking. If we look first of all at page 5, please, Seamus. It says, can I take your views on this, please? The information is very much of its time and is unpalatable when viewed alongside the inquiry and the very many letters I know you'll have read from infected parties. And then, it's what might be thought a slightly odd question, will releasing it now damage the conduct of the inquiry? I felt the best exemption to apply was Section 31. So it would appear it's something about the unpalatable nature of the content or the language used that is making people reticent. Was that your reading of this? Yes, and from the information which was
subsequently got that relates to these kinds of files, I can see exactly why they might think that. And also, it might be helpful to know that the redaction there from memory, I do have the original PDF file and can send that to the inquiry, but from memory, I believe that says something to the effect that their lawyers thought there was a legal risk in relying on Section 31.
And if we just go to page 4, we see the response to this email. An alternative view is put forward at the bottom half of the page. My view is the benefits of disclosing the information outweigh the disadvantages to withhold it, even if there are grounds to, which it seems there aren't. Simply makes Gov look like it still has things to hide. The language in the documents will be perceived as cold and unfeeling. And then there's a reference to the fact that, well, the inquiry will no doubt disclose it in any event, so better for the government to be on the front foot. Is there...
Are you turning away from this?
I am, yes.
Could we just go back to page 7? What puzzled me when I first saw this was the bit which comes after the redaction. So, piecing it together is your conclusion, and tell me if it isn't, that it wasn't so much what was being said, but how it was being said and what that revealed about the attitudes of those who were saying it.
Exactly.
Thank you.
And you'll have noticed that underneath the bit that's redacted, it actually says the records team here are keen to release the information.
Yes. The information.
Yes. They don't think there's a reason to withhold in terms of the actual content of the information. And then, as you say, the debate goes on to...
So this isn't hiding a secret in the sense of what the secret's about, but it's hiding what is the way in which it was being expressed between people.
That's...
If it's hiding, that is. That's a conclusion which I have to think about, obviously.
Yes.
Jason, these are emails from 2018. Is there a later part of it? Is this material that you've ever obtained?
Yes, so I got this material by doing my old trick of FOIing for the internal correspondence about the original FOI.
Which is what this is.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
But you actually, did you get the 20 pages of the file that it refers to?
Possibly, and possibly only in part. The only reason I can't be sure is with the amount of FOIs that have gone on. I couldn't quite say for certain in regard to this particular one, but I could find out and let you know.
But I think in terms of overall numbers, you said in your statement, and your statement was some time ago, I think a year or so ago,
yes.
If not more. At that point in time, you'd made more than 1,000 FOI requests.
Yes, and it's probably gone up a fair bit since then. Yeah.
We can take that down, thank you, Seamus. I just wanted to look with you at some bits and pieces of other information that you referred to in your statement. So we can see, for example, you talk about your first FOI request. Seamus, that's WITN 1210014, please. And if we go to the next page, what we see is a list of factor VIII concentrates. And as I understand it, this was your first request. It was made to the Oxford Haemophilia Centre.
Yes.
And you asked for details of products used in Oxford in the first six years in the 1980s.
Yes, and what's funny about this request, I didn't put it in my statement, but I'm remembering it now, is in their actual response, the Oxford Haemophilia Centre had said, we have redacted the names of suppliers or something to that effect due to commercial... I think they relied on a commercial redaction, but they actually didn't. So as well as this being my first FOI request, it was also my first experience of the incompetence, I guess, in actually responding to them on both sides. And that was demonstrated also in the Cabinet Office emails, where they applied redactions, but then you were just able to copy and paste the text out and see what was underneath. But yeah, I did get this list. Now, whether or not this is, I believe these were the products used between two time periods, but looking at it, I would think there were other batches. So whether or not you could say this is a complete list or not, I'm not sure, but I suppose it could potentially be compared to the annual returns.
Just to pick up on the point you made about what they were going to redact and failed to, was it then your understanding that what they had intended to do is redact the name Profilate Factorate, or redact Alpha and Armour? Or?
Yes, that's my understanding, yeah.
You've then, so that was your first FOI request. It resulted in an answer. You said not all your requests or similar requests have been quite as successful. So if we look at another couple of examples, SHOMIC WITN 1210015. We go to the second page. You asked here the Cardiff and Vale University Health Board, so the public body with responsibility for the Cardiff Haemophilia Centre, please provide a list of products and any other relevant information that were administered to haemophiliacs on a clinical trials exemption basis during the period January 83 to December 1986. We go to the second page, the next page, and we look at the bottom half of the page. That's it. So this is I think the substantive response you've got. I'm writing further to your email below. I can now confirm that the UHB, the University Health Board, has completed a search of its records and established it does not hold information falling within the confines of your request. And it goes on to say such information would have been recorded within clinical trial documentation, but they're no longer held. They would have been destroyed after 15 years.
Yes. And it's probably worth saying the reason why in the request I'd bolted on the narrowing the scope to on a clinical trials exemption basis was I think at that time I had developed the view, which I still have now, that the clinical trials exemption tool was abused in relation to using factor products which were not licensed in a way that went, I feel, beyond the intention of CTX.
We can take that down. I wanted to then ask you about the FOI requests that you described starting to make to the Department of Health in September 2017 for files that you thought should have been at the National Archives and were not, and they're a series called HIM 221.
Yes.
First of all, why were you interested in those files, and can you then just perhaps give us a narrative of what then happened?
So the HIM 221 series of files is the series that people here and that have looked at this ever, in the past would have seen were published in a heavily redacted form on the Department of Health's old website in the early 2000s, which was subsequently digitally archived on the National Archives website. And going through that series of files, I noticed one, it was heavily redacted, and I felt that the redactions in that went beyond personal information. I think sometimes there are even examples where dates had been redacted or names of companies had been redacted. It went beyond what you would expect. And also, and helpfully, the redactions in that series are not black blocks that you can see. It's just whited out. So on a lot of the redactions, unless you know what should be there, you don't even know there's been a redaction some of the time. Because that was on the National Archives website, I was on the National Archives website, and so began to plug into their haemophilia, blood products, HIV blood, general keywords, and saw that there were files physically at the archive which were not available online. And so I went there one day, physically in person, which for me is, I think, something like a 250-mile round trip. Paid £5 for my reader's ticket, and sure enough, there was plenty of stuff there that, as far as I could see, the Department of Health had never released, which didn't quite mirror up to their statements over the years, which I know we'll probably come on to that separately. But that was why my interest in those files began. And being physically at the National Archives, each file had a reference number on it, and I began to record in an Excel spreadsheet online what those reference numbers were. And it was quite apparent that the reference numbers followed a pattern, and the reference number would relate to the title of the file. And you could see that there was nothing particularly complicated about doing this. Anyone could have done it. It was, you've got files 1 to 10, and 5 to 7 are missing. And this applied to lots of different types of series. And so that's where this identification that files were missing, that ought to exist, began.
I think if we look at WITN 1210019, please, Seamus. We go to the second page. I'm just hoping you can talk us through and perhaps summarise what the response was and what you learned. So this is a reply from the Department of Health, October 2017. And then if we look down the bottom of the page, we can see a reference to. This is setting out your request. A reference to only a certain number of the files. You thought 11 files were actually available. Go to the next page. Is this right? You've listed here a series of files that you think should be available at TNA but weren't.
Yes, so this was... There were two competing sets of releases here where the ones that I was saying should be available but aren't were the files which were placed online following the Penrose inquiry by the Department of Health. And having downloaded all of that stuff and scheduling it became apparent that these files, file volumes that I've set out here, had not been placed online as part of that exercise for reasons which were and are now still unclear as to why that didn't happen at that time.
And if we go to page 5, I think we see the response to your request. Was that DH holds the paper originals of these files. However, as the information held by DH is already in the public domain, we will, under Section 21 of the FOI Act, refer you to the published source. Here's a link to the National Archives website. Why was that not an answer to your query, in your view?
So the reason why that wasn't a good answer was I'd noticed there was a significant difference between the stuff that was published following the Penrose inquiry and was available to download online was mostly unredacted. There was the very occasional page that was, but it looked like a genuine attempt to be transparent with those particular files. But the ones I set out, and what they're talking about, the other source I should go to here, is the heavily redacted ones which were, it appears, dealt with very differently to the ones following the Penrose inquiry. So they're right in a sense that some of the information was available from another source, but when you take into account the redactions, not all of the information I was asking for was.
And then if I can ask you about another exchange about a series of files, it's at WITN 1210008, please, Seamus. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I've given you completely the wrong reference. That's your statement, Jason. 020. So WITN 1210020. My apologies. Go to the second page. So this refers to the TBL19 series of files, and you've said, if we go down the page, in your request, these are concerned with hepatitis C. Some volumes of these files are available on TNA's catalogue, but not all of them. I've outlined those which are not yet on TNA's online discovery catalogue. Given that the department says it's committed to transparency, please can you make the files available on the TNA's catalogue as soon as possible? And then you've flagged up some specific files. What was your concern in relation to this series of files?
Well, there's so many examples of doing this, and I only exhibited some of them to my statement because there were literally so many, and I was conscious of the wording of the Rule 9. But again, making schedules of these various series that are clearly relevant to the matters this inquiry is looking at. And there was, in almost every single series, there was what appeared to be selective missing files that probably goes into the into the hundreds, across a wide series of files. And so my concern was that amongst virtually every series of files relevant to these matters, there are missing files.
There's an answer on the next page about the TBL files, but what I wanted to actually do is pick up, because it goes back to the HIM 22 series files at the bottom of the page. So if we look at the bottom, so we can see there, bottom of the page says there are 3 files which will become historic records at the end of 2017 and will be made available at the National Archives next year. And then if we just look at the bottom, we've got 2 of the HIM 22 files listed. If we go over the page, we then see reference to various files having been destroyed. So third paragraph says HIM 003, V001 and 2 have been destroyed as the content didn't meet the criteria for permanent preservation at the National Archives. And then it describes, if we just look down the page briefly, others not yet due for transfer, and others further that were destroyed. Now, you've referred in your witness statement to some of these files being destroyed. Is this what you were referring to?
Yes, and the reason why in their answer they've condensed so many different series is because I'd submitted separate FOI requests for each of the series where I'd identified missing files, and in their answer, helpfully, I suppose, they've condensed them all into one answer. But you can see in that top paragraph there, those particular series, they're saying it contained papers about the Haemophilia Society and have been destroyed. So it's material that was clearly relevant to this inquiry that was destroyed. And the same for anything that starts with HIM is, in my view, going to be relevant based on looking. I'm sure that the paralegals of this inquiry will have clocked that a long time ago. So, yes.
And then we can take that down. I just want to then ask you about the process of going to the ICO, just by reference to one example. So JEVA 5071, please, Shomik. So this is an example. We'll move back from the Department of Health to Oxford now. You've asked for information. You're dissatisfied with the response. You've gone to the ICO. What then happened?
Well, after some time, the ICO, if we could scroll down the page just a little bit, concluded that the Trust had failed to comply with its obligations under Section 10 of the Freedom of Information Act, which is no great surprise given the way that not just Oxford but government departments across the board deal with it. I mean, I could go to the ICO, probably hundreds of times with the amount of times that has not happened. I feel it's more often the case that a request is not dealt with within the statutory limit than is. But it's worth, to be fair, saying that I think that is applicable to a number of different matters above infected blood. I don't think FOI has the priority in most public organisations or the resources than it should. I actually attended a meeting only a couple months back organised by Open Democracy, and they had shown the amount of budget that is afforded to FOI across the board, and you can see there's a report available on their website about this, and you can see that over time the amount of resource afforded on the whole to FOI just goes down and down and down, whilst the use of it and arguably its importance is going up, and especially with what's to come in the face of the pandemic, it will be very important to many people, I expect. And so I don't suggest that the only reason that this is happening is because of an orchestrated cover-up in regards to infected blood, but there are, I think, specific examples, perhaps like those Cabinet Office emails we were looking at, that do show that.
And I've gone to this as an example rather than because of any particular significance in its own right. It illustrates the process, and you've ended up going to the ICO, I think, on a number of occasions. Yes,
yeah. There are 3 decision notices against public bodies, which I submitted for the purposes of today. I think there's one to the Cabinet Office. As you said, I don't think we need to go to them, but there's been many other times I've gone to the ICO as well. It's not out of the ordinary at all, and I'm just glad that in my experience I feel like the ICO are fair, actually, and are much fairer than the departments themselves.
We can take that down, thank you. Now you described in your statement also another series that you were looking at, the JA418 series. And I think you again, working in the National Archive or looking at the National Archive's Discovery Catalogue, you found volumes that were not there, is that right?
Yes.
Or found that there were volumes that were not there that you thought should be there?
Yes.
And that led to you raising a concern about the way in which ministers were talking about the availability of information. Is that correct?
Yes. For decades, I think is probably right. I think this goes back to the early 2000s. Multiple health ministers have said, it's well documented through Hansard, I expected replies to many people, that all documents are in the public domain or have been destroyed. And I think the conclusion I reached at some point in time was, I've used the phrase, it's the greatest lie they ever told, and the reason why it's the greatest lie is that not only was it untrue, and it's been shown now to be untrue, but by saying if it's not in the public domain, it's been destroyed, at that time in the early 2000s and subsequently mid-2000s, I think that alone felt scandalous to our community. And they could go to the press and they could say, they've destroyed the documents, it's a scandal. And they have destroyed some files, as we've seen. But the other result of that is it stops people from looking. Because why would you look for something, anything more to this story, if you've been told what's there is there, there's nothing more because it's been destroyed? It stops people from looking. And I can't actually really explain to this inquiry now why in the face of that I even bothered to look. But for whatever reason I did. And when it became beyond doubt that it wasn't true, I then sought the help of Baroness Featherstone to try and address it because I felt that doing that as an individual, I wasn't going to get very far.
And we'll just look at the letter there, WITN 1210024. We go to the next page. We can see, this is March 2018, you wrote to Baroness Featherstone saying, I was wondering what we might be able to do in terms of getting a stop put to overturn the below line by ministers. And you express a concern that that might be the line that was then given to the inquiry. Ministers took the line that all documents up to 1995 are available through the National Archive. You've given some examples there, and then you've set out in your email to Baroness Featherstone your understanding from some of the research you'd undertaken that was not the case.
Yes.
And I think that was, I think, taken up by her with the Department of Health.
Yes.
We look at WITN 1210025. We go to the next page. Am I right to understand this is the response to the line of inquiry or the trail that you began?
Yes, and it's worth saying as well that it wasn't quite as simple as Baroness Featherstone writes and there was a reply. This had to be chased multiple times before we got this reply. And just to add as well, I am very grateful to Baroness Featherstone for helping me with this.
And the letter, which is from the Department of Health's Director General Global and Public Health, says in the first paragraph, as you'll appreciate, there are many thousands of documents. It is a complicated picture between those that are available, those that have been recommended for release, and those still to be considered. We are committed to complete openness, and your questions are welcome. In this letter, we've addressed the contents of the 2 files you have asked about and their release to the National Archives, the process for file release, why this process can be delayed, and the ongoing work to compile a list of all the files the department holds or has held relating to the issue of infected blood. There's then a response in relation to some specific files, and we can see at the bottom of the page, we look at the last paragraph, Shomek, it's not clear why these 2 file sets were not released previously, and I can only apologise for that. Also, I'm sorry that I cannot be firm on the dates that these 2 sets of files will be available at the National Archives, but DHSC has no control over this part of the transfer process. And then if we just go to the next page, it's a discussion of the process for transfer, but if we look at the very bottom, this then I think picks up upon your concern about ministers saying that all documents were available when all documents were not available.
Yeah.
So under the heading Statement on Release of Files, in relation to the statement, all documents up to 1995 are available through the National Archives. The line is normally nuanced to explain that it relates to all relevant files, and I am sorry that in some instances this did not happen. As you will understand, what is considered to be relevant is a subjective decision, and it is not clear why the 2 file sets you've identified were not included. Just before we look at what's then said, to try and unpick that and work out what you understood by it. Was this your understanding of what was being said? First of all, the statement was wrong because of its use of the word all rather than all relevant.
Yes.
And secondly, it was wrong in any event because even if it said all relevant, not all relevant files had been, because here were 2 examples that hadn't been.
Exactly, and also it's really important to note, yes, there were 2 examples because I felt that it would have been overkill to give Baroness Featherstone hundreds of examples. And so they've also clung on to that as in, these are 2 examples. But I think at that point as well, if not before, it was then immediately apparent, I think, to the Department of Health that we were on to this. And it was time to do something about it because of, I think, the fact that an inquiry was going to happen. I strongly suspect that if this inquiry had not been announced and was not going to happen, that the response would have been different, I think.
And then we see at the bottom of the page that the department's now going to use the amended line. So rather than the snappy all documents up to 1995, it's going to be all files up to 1995 previously deemed to be relevant to the issue of infected blood and which were agreed to release by the Advisory Council were transferred to the National Archive. However, we recognise that this did not include all files that may be relevant, and work on identifying all additional pre-1990 files for transfer is continuing, as well as releasing these files to the public. DHSC is committed to cooperating fully with the Infected Blood Inquiry. This new line will be shared with all parts of DHSC. Now you've subsequently, I think, picked up, and I don't know whether you understand it to be because of this or for unrelated reasons, a letter was sent by Chris Wormold to 2 former health ministers.
Yes.
Perhaps we'll just look at that.
Are we turning away from this document?
From this document, although not the theme, but from this document.
Yes, because did you ever investigate further the difference of reasoning in deemed to be relevant on the page which isn't now on the screen, and this may be relevant?
No.
And the fact that it's a subjective decision by someone unnamed?
No, I didn't, but that's a fair avenue to explore, I think.
I mean, in a sense, it could, I'm not saying it was, but it could be open to the interpretation that if I'm prepared to say this is relevant, you have it. If I'm prepared to say it's not relevant, you don't.
Yeah.
But without knowing who the I is.
Yes.
Yes, I see.
So that was the response to Baroness Featherstone on the 7th of June 2018. If we go to WITN 1210027, go to the second page, we'll see this is a letter to Baroness Blackwood, dated the 20th of June 2018. If we just look at the next page, we'll see it's from the Permanent Secretary to the Department of Health and Social Care, and there's a near identical letter of the 21st of June to Jane Ellison, also being written to in her capacity as former health minister. But if we just stick with this one, if we go to the previous page, it says, I'm writing to you as a former health minister within the Department of Health and Social Care, as I've recently received a letter from the Right Honourable Baroness Featherstone raising concerns about public statements describing the release of infected blood files to National Archives. Between 2015 and 16, the department released a large number of files in the light of the Penrose inquiry in Scotland. This process involved officials conducting a search of all files to identify relevant files for transfer to the National Archives. Further to this release of documents, and in answer to some parliamentary questions, the statement, all documents up to 1995 are available through the National Archives, has been used on several occasions. This line was not normally nuanced to explain that it related to all relevant files, and I am sorry that in some instances this did not happen. As you will understand, what is considered to be relevant is a subjective decision. And then we see the next paragraph refers to the new amended line, and then the last paragraph says, I'm drawing this to your attention as you were holding office when these statements were made, either in PQs, parliamentary questions, or in one instance in a speech. Attached at Annex A are the PQ responses identified following a trawl of Hansard by DHSC officials. This is just from noting and no action is required. We're not able to correct the official record for previous sessions. Top of the next page. I apologise that you were advised incorrectly on these occasions. And then there's a reference to an exercise to identify all files that the department holds or has held that are in any way linked to the issue of infected blood, so that the department can respond to the inquiry. And if we just go over the page, we can see in the annex to the letter a list of some multiple occasions upon which it was said that all documents had been disclosed. This is by Baroness Blackwood. We've got the same exercise performed in relation to Jane Ellison. So is this right, Jason? You're raising this with Baroness Featherstone has led to the Permanent Secretary at the Department of Health and Social Care essentially apologising to two former ministers because they were incorrectly given the line that all documents prior to 1995 have been disclosed, etc., when that wasn't the case, and they made those statements to or in Parliament.
Yes, exactly. And the other thing I want to point out on the previous page is where it said, I don't know if it was on this page or the previous one, that no action is required. It might.
Previous one, bottom of the previous page.
You know, I think given for how long that had gone on, and this had been said before 2015 as well, or a very similar line, I feel that, okay, they can't correct the record in Hansard for a previous session, but I feel strongly, given everything that everyone has been through, not just me, but everyone that has tried to look for documents. I include people like Andrew March and the Lewis brothers. There should have been some kind of statement to Parliament, to this community, to say that we have been telling you the wrong thing. I found these letters, the apology letters, because I happened to be searching the House of Commons library. There was no public statement that this apology had happened whatsoever. I strongly suspect that this is the first time many people in our community are learning about this. And I think that's wrong.
And you think it's wrong because the apology is being made to the ministers, and that may or may not be wrong, but the apology is not being made also to people in the community who would have had a direct and intimate and important interest in this material.
Yes, exactly. And I can well imagine there are people that did campaign and who have now died that believed this line, and not even their families were given the apology. So, yes, I think that's right.
Now, you've said in your statement that it was in June 2018, which is, we can see is around the time of this correspondence, you said the Department of Health abruptly stopped cooperating with your FOI requests. What do you mean by that?
In fairness, there was a different way they could have done it under the Act, but I had about 60 FOIs pending for different series where there were missing files. In fairness, they probably could have turned around on a cost basis, grouped them all together and said, this is getting ridiculous. They didn't do that, but they did cancel all of my pending FOI requests, which I'd spent a lot of time putting together, by the way, because they'd now decided, for whatever reason, perhaps because of this inquiry, perhaps because all this had been going on for so long now, of them either realising that this was wrong, these lines that they were putting out in Parliament and to those impacted were wrong, or because they wanted to get house in order for the inquiry, or both, had decided to commission the Government Internal Audit Agency to carry out an audit into their relevant files. And because of that, they were able to cancel all my FOI requests because there is an exemption regarding something being subject to an audit.
And for the sake of completeness, we'll just look at the letter sent to you, WITN 1210008. Oh, I've done it again. I'm sorry. I keep giving the number of your statements and not the exhibit number. Sorry, Shomik. Sorry, Jason. WITN 1210026. And if we go to the second page, we can see the letter sent to you 4th of June 2018. Is this what you're referring to?
Yes.
Thank you for your request, etc. And then we can see below the italicised section that last sentence, that paragraph, I therefore aggregated your requests. So that's the putting them all together. I can confirm the DHSC may hold information relevant to your requests. However, it is being withheld under Section 22, which states that public bodies are not obliged to disclose information that is intended for future publication. Section 22 is a qualified exemption, and we are required to assess as objectively as possible whether the balance of public interest favours disclosing or withholding the information. In general, there is a strong public interest in information being made as freely available as possible. However, as there is a wider public interest in the files that have been created by DHSC in relation to blood policy, it is important that this information can be accessed simultaneously by the general public rather than releasing information file series by file series. We go on to the next page. As an assurance process is ongoing, early release of the requested information could be misrepresentative of the status of the files that we hold relating to blood policy. It is in the public interest that the assurance process is able to conclude before making this information available to the public to ensure confidence and accuracy in the information disclosed. Therefore, we consider that, on balance, the public interest is better served by withholding this information under Section 22 of the Freedom of Information Act at this time. And that's the decision you've referred to.
Yes, yes. And I think what else is interesting about this is if we could go back to the top of that, where you can actually see the wording of this particular request they've responded to.
Previous page, please, Shane.
So, and if we could just, yes, there, thank you. So I had asked for a list and status of the volumes within a particular series, the titles of those volumes. So I wasn't actually asking for the content of the files even. This wasn't about that information, the content of those files being available so that people could see documents. I was just asking if these files existed, and if not, what the deal was. And they weren't even willing to give me that. So I think the reasoning that they give kind of misrepresents the position a little bit.
And then coming forward in time from 2018 to 2020, in terms of your ability to utilise Freedom of Information Act requests to central government, there's something called the round robin list, is that right?
Yes.
And you have the privilege of being on it.
Yeah, so I was totally unaware of this until recent months, within the last year. A reporter that I can name, it's a public reporter called Jenna Corduroy from the Open Democracy Organisation, contacted me. And she is greatly involved in looking at this body, I guess you could call it, called Clearinghouse, that sits within the Cabinet Office, who preside and kind of act as an arbiter over freedom of information. And people may have seen the various press reports in the national press about, far wider than infected blood, but about this, they describe it as an Orwellian unit. And she contacted me to say that whilst looking into this issue, she'd noticed my FOIs, and I was sent, they had been campaigning heavily to get these lists that are known internally as round-robin lists, and are basically considered, well, by much of the national press at least, to be journalist blacklists. And I came into possession of a number of these lists, and sure enough, my name appeared multiple times within these lists from different government departments, where I could make an FOI to virtually any government department, and my FOI was then referred to Clearinghouse at the Cabinet Office, basically no matter what it was. And so I had entered this list. I'll leave it to others to decide whether it's a blacklist or not. But
if we just look at the two documents in relation to that, Shane McCann, should be JEVA 00000082. So we can see this is an email of the 10th of March 2020, subject round robin list from Clearinghouse mailbox to FOI Clearinghouse. Dear colleagues, please find attached the round robin list for the 10th of March 2020 to note 5 new requests were received today, and then there's reference to JJ Evans, which is you.
Yes.
And then it says no new guidance has been added. And then if we go to JEVA 5083, please, Shomik. This is a week or so later, so the 16th to the 18th of March 2020 round robin list. Again, it's from Clearinghouse to, it seems to be from Clearinghouse to Clearinghouse mailbox. Dear colleagues, please find attached the round robin list for the 16th to the 18th of March 2020. To note, 2 requests were received, those redacted. Guidance has been added to the following, and then your name. So you're on a list, and now you're the subject of guidance.
Yes.
Do you know any more about what it is about?
There are examples. I may have submitted them. I can't remember off the top of my head, where you can see some of the advice that's added to some of my requests. But I think there's 2 problems with this. One, my requests are being dealt with differently to someone else's would be, for reasons which are unclear to me. And secondly, I'm not made aware of this by them, but also within the FOI Act, there's a principle that all FOI requests should be what they call applicant blind. In other words, it shouldn't matter if I'm a carpenter, a journalist, an astronaut, whatever. My FOI should be dealt with in the same way, no matter who I am. And in fact, it shouldn't really be considered what my job is or what I do, or if I'm a campaigner or anything, because I'm a citizen asking for information. And what this shows is that applicant blind ethos is not being followed. And that's also demonstrated in a submission I think I made of a data access request response I got from the Department of Health, where I'd submitted an FOI request to them, and in their internal email chain discussing it, they'd identified that this is Jason of the Factor 8 campaign, which they shouldn't be doing as part of the applicant blind process.
And as a matter of fact, what is happening to FOI requests that you make to central government in 2020, 2021?
As far as I can tell, every request now gets referred to Clearinghouse.
And do some get answered? Do all of them get answered? Do all of them get turned down?
It's very dependent, but without a doubt, I think Cabinet Office and Department of Health are the worst. The Cabinet Office are definitely the worst in terms of timescale, and this, as we saw through the emails, they seem to err on the side of we're not going to disclose, and if he goes to the ICO and manages to win, then fine, but we'll try our luck at ICO, basically. And I remember when a number of us went to the meeting with Oliver Dowden and Nadine Dorries in January 2020, Brian Williams, who happens to get involved in these FOIs quite a lot, was there, and I made a joke to him where I said, I'm sorry about all the FOI nuisance, and he kind of laughed a little bit. But it's almost like this unspoken game now where we both know they're just not being transparent, and it's almost like a joke because it's gone on for so long and is so consistent.
Wants to ask you next about then some Public Health Laboratory Service documents or files. You talked in your statement about how Adrian Goodyear brought to your attention a letter from Dr. Arenstam.
Yes. Adrian Goodyear had, and also Andrew March had mentioned this document to me on more than one occasion.
And we'll just look at the document so that we can see why it was of interest to all of you. We have looked at it, I think, in an inquiry hearing before,
Yeah.
possibly in one of the presentations. HHFT 0000916_002. We can see it's a letter, 14th of May 1979, from Dr. Arenstam, Trelaws, to Dr. Krask at the Public Health Laboratory Service. Dear John, we've not had any cases of hepatitis following NHS Factor 8. As far as your suggestion about transfusing mild haemophiliacs with this material is concerned, I totally disagree with this concept. I do not wish any of my mild haemophiliacs to develop hepatitis in any form, and therefore adopt the policy of either using DDAVP or cryoprecipitate. Now, when you had this letter drawn to your attention, what is it you then wanted to find out?
I wanted to see what had caused this letter to be sent.
And so what steps did you take?
So if we could just scroll up a little bit on this document, please. So, although we could already see it in all fairness, Public Health Laboratory, Dr. Krask, and also the date, May 79. So my instinct was to go to the National Archive and to find the PHLS files from that time period, which I thought would either contain what caused this letter or other material surrounding it that would be relevant to it, or both.
And then what happened when you tried to identify the relevant PHLS files?
So anyone, might be a fun activity on lunch, can go to the National Archives online discovery catalogue right now and type in this reference, DN1/33, and what you'll see is that there's a big piece of text on it that says misplaced while on loan to government department. And my next step then was to find out what department, when, why, how, all of those questions.
And let's look at JEVA 5030, please, Shomik. We can see this is you in May 2017. Dear National Archives, almost 1 month ago I wrote to you, but I've received no response or reply despite attempts to prompt you, and so I would expect this request to become a priority. My query was in regard to record DN1/33. Your website states that this record is missing and was misplaced while on loan to government department, as you've just told us. And then you ask, and you say this is under the FOI request, you're asking was this the Department of Health or if a different department, and when this loan took place.
Yes.
And then what happened in terms of getting an answer to that?
Took a while, and as you can see there, I'd already asked for it, but eventually I did get a response, but I think I may even have had to have intervened again subsequent to this. I suspect the answer might be revealed there.
Top of the next page is what you're told. I think, in fairness, I should say that the date of this appears to be 1st of June, so this, your chasing does appear to have been responded to promptly, I should say. So top of the next page. There should be a second page, Shomik. Having checked in the repository, I can confirm that document DN1/33 was on loan to the Department of Health to a now defunct subsidiary body, the Health Protection Agency. It was originally requisitioned by them on the 11th of January 2010. So document had gone to the Health Protection Agency at that point in time 7 years earlier and not made its way back to the National Archives, is that right?
Yes, correct.
And we've got the letter that it responded to, yes, and a following response. And actually, for the sake of completeness, let's just look at them. They've come to the inquiry from a different route. HHFT 0000916_003, I think is the first letter in time. Yes. So this is the letter from the Public Health Laboratory Service, 10th of May 1979, to Dr. Arenstam. And again, I think we've looked at this in an earlier hearing, but if we just look at the text, you will be aware that the study of NHS Factor 8 has now been going for almost a year. I've not so far been notified of any cases of hepatitis in patients treated with the designated batches used in this study. Perhaps you could also let me know whether in actual fact you've had any cases after these batches. I would suggest that for the second year of the study, some of this material should be used to treat mild haemophiliacs coming up for non-urgent operations such as tooth extraction. We have found from observations at Oxford this is the best way of finding out whether the material is associated with cases of hepatitis, as most patients treated under these circumstances will be susceptible to non-A non-B viruses in the transfused material. I'm aware you may prefer to use commercial concentrate for some patients in this class, but it would provide valuable information if you could use some of the material issued in the way I've suggested. I should, in fairness, I think, just refer to the bit in handwriting at the bottom. I realise that the above suggestion does not apply to the LMT boys, I think that says. But that's the letter, as we understand it, that triggered Dr. Arenstam's response.
Yes.
Saying, I'm not going to do that. And then we've got it, I don't think I need to display it, there's a further letter from Dr. Crass saying, oh, I didn't mean it quite like that. I'm paraphrasing, but
yes,
we've got the three letters. Is it, as far as you understand, a whole file that's gone missing that was on loan to the Health Protection Agency within which these letters would be located, or just the letters themselves?
So DN1/33 would be a whole file, and so, you know, I think it's good that letter has been obtained, but the question remains that what else would have been in that file, and from the other files, because the other PHLS files from different date ranges are there, and so things like minutes of meetings, etc., and other documents may be lost forever. And so as to what else could be in there, I could only speculate.
And you, in terms of your experience of the files, would you expect this file, I've lost reference to it, DN1/33, would it be, in your experience, containing files relating to a particular point in time? So it's likely to be all material from around the late 70s or early 80s? Yes,
and the description on the National Archives website actually says, I think it's something like April to June 1979, the material in this particular file would cover.
And do you have any understanding as to why in 2010 the Health Protection Agency, which was then a subsidiary body of the Department of Health, was requesting this material from 1979?
Well, I think the best place to start in answering that is JEVA 29, page 4.
So JEVA 5029, please, Shomik.
So in the second email there is a chronology of some of what's gone on with this file.
Sorry, which page is that? Because I'm looking at a different page.
It's on screen now, the bullet points, which outline the chronology. It's on the correct ones on my screen.
So this is
so
in terms of tracking/tracing, is that the bit you're referring to? A summary of the below email trail appears to indicate.
Yes. So you can see in 2016, long, I think before I start asking about this file, there'd been some interrogation of what's happened to it. And they've outlined some of the chronology there of when it was uplifted or loaned to the HPA. They think it's possibly gone to the Ministry of Justice for an opinion on sensitivity. It's come back and just been all over the shop, I think is one way to phrase it. But then, interestingly, and all this correspondence has come by way of a totally separate FOI, if we could go to page 7 of this document, there's some explanation as to why it was sensitive and why it may have gone missing. Redacted has now had a look at the file and has identified something that we don't know. It appears it is more complicated than previously thought. And then if we could, on this same page, just scroll down to the next email. It says, second line down towards the end, I know that it contains a sensitive item, which is why it was not opened. In other words, made available to the public. And then if we could go to page 24. At the bottom of this email, it says, also, what is the position on keeping this information out of the public domain permanently? And this is in 2004, long before, about this same file. So there was something in it. We don't know what they were talking about because it's redacted, and I hope the inquiry can get these emails from TNA without the redactions. There was something in that file that was deemed, sorry about my clicking, to be sensitive, at least going back to 2004, when it was suggested, how do we keep this out of the public forever? Which is kind of unprecedented, I think. I mean, there are 20-year rules, 30-year rules, but forever. And that is exactly the position we've ended up in the sense that it's gone missing on loan to a government department. I could only speculate as to what has happened.
And I think, is there a more recent update? You've received something further in relation to this? Yes. So I had submitted a fresh FOI some time ago asking for the National Archives to remove the redactions, basically, so that it would reveal what the sensitive item is and what is the score with this file, basically. And I think we can see that at JEVA 00000085. Is this the right one?
If we could just scroll down. Yes, this is it. Yes.
So you ask, can you provide me with copies of all emails disclosed as part of, and that's the reference, but without any application of Section 36. So in other words, without the redactions.
Yeah.
And the response, I think, we see, if we go to the third page.
It's also worth noting that was it, the 8th of April 2021 that I asked that.
And if we go to the third page, we can see bottom half of the page is a response 4th of June 2021.
So around 2 months later, over the statutory limit.
Yes, in fact, I'm sorry, that's still, they're still telling you they haven't finished.
Yeah.
They're thinking about it, sorry. So we should go to the next page. We can see bottom half of the page, just to get the date, FOI request National Archives, so 9th of June 2021. This is the substantive response, which is then on the following page. Thank you for your inquiry, etc., etc. Third paragraph, unfortunately, we're unable to provide you with this information because it remains covered by the exemption at Section 36(2)(b) and (c) of the FOI Act, which exempts information if released would prejudice the conduct of public affairs. And then, if we go down further couple of paragraphs, it says we're required to conduct a public interest test when applying any qualified exemption, and they're supposed to weigh the public interest in disclosure and the public interest in withholding. With the agreement of the qualified person, who in this case is the Chief Executive of the National Archives, in whose reasonable opinion this exemption is engaged, the public interest has now been concluded and the balance of the public interest has been found to fall in favour of non-disclosure. And if we see the bottom of the page, it's considered that the release of some of the information requested would prejudice the effective function of the process for retention and transfer of public records. It is important that officials are able to exchange views freely and frankly and to fully discuss any issues that affect this process. To release some of the information requested may act as an inhibitor to necessary discussions which would not be in the public interest. And then the next paragraph, after careful consideration, it's been decided that the balance of the public interest lies in favour of withholding the information on this occasion, and that the factors for non-disclosure outweigh any benefits of release. And then you've been sent copies of the same emails. Is it with all the redactions still in place, or most of the redactions still in place?
Nothing was changed.
And that's you received that this week?
Yes, that happened the night before last.
And is this right? You have, I think, no way of knowing whether what's redacted has central to issues relating to infected blood, or indeed absolutely nothing to do with issues relating to infected blood.
Yep, I make no bones about that whatsoever. This could be to do with anything in 1979, which, 40 plus years later, is deemed to be too sensitive for the public to know about. It could, we don't know. But needless to say, 1979 at the Public Health Laboratory Service was a big year for the events this inquiry is looking at. And hopefully the inquiry will be able to find out.
Sarah, at the time, it's probably a good point to break for lunch.
Yes. We'll take a break until 2:05. 2:05.